This is Teresa Davis, your host of the Grief Mentor podcast. Welcome to Season 2, where together we will journey through the hardships that grief thrusts upon us while holding on to the anchor that is trustworthy and true. Here you will find interviews and biblical truths that speak healing into the mind, body, and spirit of the brokenhearted. I'm so glad you're here. Welcome back to the show today, guys. This is your host, Teresa Davis. Today, I have something special planned for you. I'm going to share a personal piece of my grief journey. When Andrew left this earth, we were flooded with many cards of encouragement and a few books along the way. And if you have walked this journey of loss of a loved one, you know how difficult it is sometimes to read those cards. And I remember as they would come in, sometimes I wouldn't read them right away. I would hold on to them and read them later. But every one of those cards were extremely important to me, and I kept them still to this day. But we also received a few books, and I was very careful of what I would allow myself to be exposed to because I was so broken at that point and could barely function in everyday life. But I'm going to share a book with you today that really had an impact on me and my husband. A friendship had formed between me and another mama many years before Andrew's death that I had no idea that God had orchestrated. She too had lost a son, and I was very familiar with her story. And Tammy sent me several things in the mail, but one of the things she sent me was a book that I'm going to share with you today. Now, when I picked this book up, it didn't feel particularly threatening to me, but the reason it had such a big impact on me is because of the content in the story. Now, one thing I want to mention is that if you have the privilege that you have a friend that has walked the same path you have, or if God puts somebody in your path that is walking the same path you have, I can't emphasize the significance of how that can affect your journey, because if they are willing to help you walk the road that they walked and help teach and show you what has given them strength and help them in their journey, that is a very valuable resource. And Tammy was that for me. I sought her out on numerous occasions because I had to feel like I was going to live, because at that point, I really didn't know if I was going to live. Not that I was going to harm myself, but that I was going to die under the weight and the pressure of Andrew's death. I did not see a way forward out of it. I never thought I could survive it. Seeing her, and she was much further down the road of grief than me, seeing that she had survived and her son died tragically as well, seeing that she survived that, it gave me hope that I could too. And I sought her out on numerous occasions. And God love her, she always was open to me and meeting with me. And I thank God for her. And she shared this book with me, and I want to share it with you today. Now, those of you that are watching on YouTube, I'll show you the front of it here if you can see it. It's a very non-threatening looking book, right? It says Mama Mockingbird by Sauni Wood. Now, I picked this book up one night. I remember the exact night. Tony and I had come in from being gone. I don't even remember where we had been, but we sat down and I looked at this book and I said, Tony, I'm going to read this book out loud and I'm going to read it to you. And I opened the pages and the tears began to fall. And it was so difficult to read through this book, but I just kept turning the pages because I could not put it down. What I want to share with you today is I remember that day vividly, but I also remember the second time I read the book. The second time I read the book, it wasn't as intense as the first time I read the book. The third time I read it, it wasn't intense as the second time I read it. The fourth time I read it, it wasn't intense as the third time I read it. The fifth time I read it, it wasn't intense as the fourth time I read it. And I share that with you because when you hear this book, no matter where you are in your grief journey, if you're 6 months out, if you're a year out, if you're 4 years like me, if you're 10 years, this book's going to touch your heart. But what I want you to remember is especially if you're early in your grief journey. It's not going to be as intense as it is right now. So I'd like to read this book to you today. It's not a long book. So if you have experienced loss of life, or if you have experienced loss of the life that you thought you were going to have, this book will minister to you. Mama Mockingbird by Sauni Wood. A long time ago, in this grand world of ours, there lived a family of mockingbirds. Their home was in a tall green forest, surrounded by high snow-capped mountains. Their land was dotted with crystal clear lakes. There was Mama and Papa Mockingbird, 3 sons and 1 daughter. Mama and Papa Mockingbird taught their children in the best way they knew how. They taught them how to eat, to fly, to build nests, and how to sing. They shared their laughter and their music. Oh, they had their worries, to be sure. They had ups and downs just as we have, but they would sing their songs and be happy. Mama and Papa Mockingbird were proud of each of their children. They were proud of what their children did, but they were proud more of the kind of mockingbirds they had become. Mama and Papa Mockingbird had given each of their child lots of time. They had given each child the space to practice the ways of living, and it worked out quite well. Each child did splendidly indeed. As the seasons passed from one to another, it came time for their children to go off and make their own nest. Mama and Papa Mockingbird listened every night. They listened for the songs of their sons and their daughter, brought to them by the wind. The songs told them all was well. They sang their own songs back to their children. Mama and Papa Mockingbird missed their sons and daughter, to be sure, but in their hearts they knew this was the way of the world. Children were gifts to be loved, to be taught the task of life, and then the day would come when they would fly off to make their own nest. One evening, Mama and Papa Mockingbird were sitting on their limb. They were listening to hear the first songs of their children. Suddenly, high above them, a great bird began to circle and circle and circle. Closer and closer he came, and they saw it was a red-tailed hawk. A red-tailed hawk was seldom seen in this part of the forest. They had admired him from a distance, flying gracefully in the sky, or sitting regally on a tall pine tree, as if on guard for this world. The great hawk sank slowly from the sky and landed on the limb across from Mama and Papa Mockingbird. "I bring you sudden and sad news," whispered the hawk. "Your son has died." "Oh no," cried Mama Mockingbird. "I can't believe it. I won't believe it." Papa Mockingbird cried, "It isn't true. It can't be true." They cried long and mournfully. "It is true," said the red-tailed hawk. "I lift my wings of comfort over you." Then he was gone. Oh, they were sad. They cried and cried and cried. They felt such sadness and more pain than they had ever known. They knew things like this happened, but it had never happened to them. Their living children came at once, and they all cried together. Soon their other sons flew to their own nest, their wings drooping in sadness, and their daughter left for her part of the forest, crying as she flew away. Mama Mockingbird sat sadly on her limb. As the great sun set in the west, she listened to the songs of her 3 children. Oh, they were sad songs, certainly, but they were there. Mama Mockingbird opened her beak to return their song. No sound came from her beautiful throat. She was silent. She could no longer sing. Mama Mockingbird had lost her song. Each night she tried to sing, Each night, her voice was silent. At last she said to Papa Mockingbird, "I must be gone a while. I have lost my son, but I do not think I was meant to lose my song. I must go in search of my song. Take care. I will return as soon as I find my song." She flew steadily all morning long. At midday, she rested on a small holly bush. Looking up, she saw that dark clouds were rolling in. Thunder roared, lightning spit fire across the sky, and she was afraid. She had never been out alone in a storm like this before. Determined to find her song, she lifted her wings high and bravely flew headlong into the coming storm. The wind battered her. Rain blew fiercely against her. Pushing her backwards and sideways, she soon became exhausted. At last she saw a cave carved into the mountain. She flew inside. There she rested. There she slept. When she awoke, Mama Mockingbird saw a pair of eyes as round as 2 moons staring at her. The owl's round, downy head cocked to one side as he peered at her. Mama Mockingbird's feathers shook with cold and fear. "Well," the owl said, "what are you doing in my cave?" Mama Mockingbird took a deep breath. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I didn't know this was your cave. I was caught in the storm, flying against the wind. I was exhausted. I flew into your cave to seek refuge." "What kind of bird thinks she can fly against the wind in a storm like this one?" the owl asked. "I've never been in a storm like this before," Mama Mockingbird answered. "My son died, and I lost my song." She looked at the huge owl. "Can you help me find my song?" she asked softly. "I don't give a hoot about singing," the owl sniffed. He stared at Mama Mockingbird for a long time. He shifted from one foot to the other. Suddenly, his large eyes grew tender. "I wish there was something I could do to help," the owl said. He closed his eyes for a minute. Mama Mockingbird thought he had fallen asleep. "Mr. Bass," the owl exclaimed. "Yes, yes." He grew quite excited. "Old Mr. Bass down in the river has lived longer than I and has suffered twice as much as anyone I know." He looked straight at Mama Mockingbird. "You go down to the river. Call 3 times by the craggy rock. He'll appear. Tell him Owl sent you." Mama Mockingbird thanked the owl and flew down to the river. The storm was over and a gentle rain was falling from the sky. Down, down, down to the flowing river she flew. She flew over the craggy rock, circled 3 times, and landed. "Mr. Bass? Mr. Bass? Mr. Bass?" she called. Just as she called the 3rd time, an enormous fish jumped out of the water. He stretched into the air and skittered across its foamy surface. "Who is calling?" he cried. "I can't be out here very long, you know." "Oh, Mr. Bass," pleaded Mama Mockingbird, "Owl sent me." "Well?" the huge fish called back impatiently. "Mr. Bass, my son died, and I lost my song. I'm on a journey to find my song. The owl said you knew about suffering. Can you help me?" "What in the world would I know about singing?" scolded the bass. "I only know about swimming." The rock was slippery, and Mama Mockingbird fluttered her wings harder and harder to keep her balance and stay in place. "Could you give me directions?" Mama Mockingbird asked. "Where can I go to find my song? How can I stop being so sad?" "All I know," groaned Mr. Bass, is that whenever I lost something important, I just got back into the water. Many a fisherman has hooked me, and the pain was so bad I couldn't even think. I just got back into the water. And in an instant, Mr. Bass's tail disappeared under the waves. Mr. Bass! Mr. Bass! Mama Mockingbird cried, flying out over the river and flapping her wings frantically around the spot where he disappeared. What did you do then? From the deepest depths of the river, she heard his voice. I just go with the flow, he said. Mama Mockingbird, scared, confused, and tired, flew away from the river and up toward the mountains. Her head felt heavy with questions. What did Mr. Bass mean? Why couldn't the owl help? Would she ever find her song? Was her family safe? Higher and higher she flew, so lost in thought. She was startled to see that she had flown to the top of the highest mountain. The air was thin. The sun was warm. She rested on a bare limb of an old, gnarled tree and drifted off to sleep. Suddenly, she was awakened by a roaring, flapping sound. Looking up, Mama Mockingbird saw a huge bird, larger than she had ever seen before. She had a white head and a dark, full body. There was a sharp, crooked beak and piercing eyes. The great bird landed on a branch above Mama Mockingbird and stared down at her. Mama Mockingbird began to tremble. Excuse me, she stammered. My name is Mama Mockingbird. I've traveled a long way, and I seem to be lost. I hope you don't mind sharing your tree for just a little bit. I don't mind, said the huge creature, but I must admit that you are a strange sight up this high. What brings you here? I'm on a journey, Mama Mockingbird sighed. My family lives in the forest. There were 6 of us. Then my son died, and we cried and cried and cried. I was so sad, I lost my song. I've been searching and searching for it. I don't think I'll ever find it. The eagle flew to the limb and perched beside Mama Mockingbird. She took her tremendous wing and placed it gently on Mama Mockingbird's head. Yours is a sad tale, the eagle said. I think I understand, the eagle smiled. In my long life on this mountain, I have experienced loss as well. I shall fly away now, for that is what I do best. As I fly, I will think on my journey and your song. Rest here, Mama Mockingbird. As the sun sets, I will return. And with a great flapping of wings, the huge bird lifted off the tree and flew away. Mama Mockingbird closed her eyes and slept. When she awoke, the sun was slipping down in the sky. As it came to rest on the mountain top, she saw the eagle flying over the ridge. As the eagle landed, it felt as if the winds of heaven had burst forth. Slowly she nestled down on the limb. I've thought of your sorrow and your song, she said quietly. I remembered how once I had broken my wing. I could not fly, and I thought I would surely die. I lay in my nest, and as I did so, I watched the sun and learned from it. What did you learn? Mama Mockingbird asked. I learned to trust life, the eagle answered. I learned to honor the cycles of life. Each day the sun rose. It followed its path across the sky. At night, it appeared on the other side of the mountain. It rested for a moment, then disappeared. The next morning, the sun came again. And Mama Mockingbird asked. The great eagle sighed. I learned that watching it, counting on its warmth and light, trusting it, my wing healed. I learned to sit and wait. And in waiting, my wing healed. Now I fly, Mockingbird. Now I fly. Oh, great eagle, Mama Mockingbird said, do you think this is the way to find my song? Yes, Mama Mockingbird. The eagle smiled. I believe it is. Rest here for the night. At dawn, return to your family. And remember, even when the waiting gets too hard, sit, wait, watch the sunrise, watch the sunset, and your song will return in time. As light spread over the mountains, Mama Mockingbird flew on the wind, down, 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 and down into the forest. The news of her return traveled quickly through the trees, and soon all the Mockingbird family gathered to hear of her journey. That night they sat close together. They waited and watched as the sun slipped slowly behind the mountain. And that's all I have for you today, guys. So until next time, take care. From my grieving heart to yours, I long to hear your story. I want to be your grief mentor. I want to walk beside you, teach you what I've learned, help you along the way, one step at a time. The Grief Mentor sessions are now live on my website. I'm creating a 6-week course with 2 tracks. You can find more information about that on my website and enter a waiting list for updates. If you just want to chat, send me a message. I'd love to hear from you.